Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to share a little bit about me and my experience, and then of course, we can open it up more conversationally. So, I have a little bit unique of a path that I do like to share because I feel like it is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm actually a Capella legacy. So I went through the Capella MFT program, and then I went through the Capella counselor education supervision program, and took me a while to work my way back in before they let me in because it's not very common to hire their own grads. So finally did that. But the part that I wanted to share specifically with you guys today is that this whole process of becoming um, familiar with this population and working within this started with my internship journey. Okay. So let's go way back to internship. I was right there with everybody. I'm like, you want me to find a site like 6 months before I'm supposed to start? What am I supposed to tell them? Okay. I was there. I felt that. And I was like, okay. So I had been working residential treatment for a long time. And so I went in going, well, I'm going to work residential treatment. I've been very familiar with conduct disorders. And I was like, okay, that's my niche. I'm going to go there. And then I did that whole like scary application process, put together my portfolio, started sending it out, and it was like ghost town. Okay, like ghost town. And the residential treatment center that I thought I was for sure a shoe-in. I mean, I had years of working residential. They ghosted me, did not even call me back. Okay. And so, I'm like, okay, October's coming. What am I gonna do? And so I just started like anything that I could find in the area, right? And I found this residential treatment center, and they had like all these different locations that were relatively close to where I lived. I think half an hour drive is all. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. So I just sent in like this bulk of paperwork. Hey, here I am. And I talked to the clinical director. We had this really great conversation. And then I went through this whole interview process, right? We get to the end of the interview, and the clinical director says to me, well, do you know what population we work with? And at that point, I'm in intern mode. I'm like, I don't care. What, like anything will work good, right? But I was like, no, the website doesn't say anything. It talks about your locations and the therapies that you use, but it doesn't really say much. And he says, we work with autism spectrum. And I kind of had that moment, that really scary moment of like my heart sinking, like, I didn't ever expect to work with that population, nor did I have any experience working with that population. Okay. So that part of me was happening. And the other side of me, my intern brain was like, that's fine. I can do it. Like, I need some hours. Okay. So I was willing to make it work. One of the best things that happened in my entire programming was stumbling upon this specific residential. And so with that being said, that was the journey into becoming more familiar with autism spectrum and other co-occurring diagnosis. So really, I know that it was kind of labeled autism spectrum as far as this conversation, but I wanted to actually open it up just a little bit further into neurodiversity. Okay, so one of the things that we're making a shift in the field is understanding that neurodiversity can mean a lot of different things. So I'm going to actually go ahead. Let's see if do I have permission to share? Can you give me permission to share?
Yes, let me give you permission.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Or maybe not. What's going on?
I think if you also want to just write on my little three dots, you can make me a host for the time
Yes,
being,
there
and
it
that
is.
will,
Mm-hmm.
perfect. That might also allow
There
me
you
to,
go.
yay, I'm
There you
host
go.
now.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to quick open this, and again, not going to go too far in depth. I just wanted to provide a little bit more information about what we're talking about. Okay, so first and foremost, you can see we've got, I'm talking more about neurodiversity in the larger scale as far as family therapy. So really what is neurodiversity? And this is where we start to actually kind of see that um, there's a lot more neurodiversity than maybe what we think of in a clinical sense, right? We have certain diagnoses that we would say, oh, that falls under neurodiversity. But I want to just kind of break it down and looking at, neurodiversity is basically a term saying that their brain works differently. Now, interestingly enough, we can all sit in the same room and do all of our brains work in the same way? No, no. So therefore, are we all neurodiverse from one another? Yeah. So this is where we start getting way more inclusive and being able to, sorry, I'm getting if I'm host now, so I'm just going to admit this person. Does that seem okay, Rashonda? Because I'm host, it sent it to me. I'm just letting you know. I'm letting them in.
It's
Okay.
okay.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so we're starting to understand that neurodiversity encompasses a lot more into looking at that there's differences in the way that the brain works and the way that it communicates with different parts of the brain. So we're trying to move towards this more inclusive understanding that neurodiversity can be a lot more encompassing than where we kind of had it previously, kind of very narrow. Okay. And we're starting to shift from looking at those differences as differences rather than deficits. Previously, learning disorders, autism, there were a lot of conversation or terminology used that would speak kind of in deficits instead of rather identifying these as differences. And that differences make us unique and they can be very helpful to us with whatever difference we're experiencing. We're also looking at the changing of kind of that disorder terminology as something that needs to be cured, okay? And really looking at those as more kind of welcome variants of not just the human population, but even more specifically as part of the family systems that we work within, that each family is neurodivergent in their own way. They have different ways of communicating. They have different ways of functioning, and no way is right or wrong or needs to be cured as much as being able to say that these differences make them unique. And then that last one there is to really talk about how this is a natural process of identifying rather than creating kind of that stigma that kind of reduces acceptance. So the way we're talking about neurodiversity is changing, the language we're using is changing, and we're trying to really build this more as an identity piece rather than that kind of first person language. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So, just to share what is encompassed in this as far as what we look at diagnostically, these would be some of the diagnoses that would be included in what we are currently defining as neurodiversity. So, of course, we see the autism, the ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia, epilepsy, any type of the developmental learning disorders, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. This is another change in terminology. It used to be previously fetal alcohol syndrome. Again, we're now seeing that the effects of that fetal alcohol can be on a spectrum, much like autism, any type of intellectual learning disability, as well as Tourette's and tic disorders. So anything within this realm where the brain is kind of functioning in a different way is now being categorized more in the sense of a neurodiversity. Okay. All right. So let's get down to what I was talking about earlier, that first person language versus identity first language. So I really kind of like this picture on the right because essentially it shows the first person is this person holding a bag. Previously, it was more identified that whatever neurodiversity was is kind of something that the person had, right? I'm a person with autism. This would essentially kind of make it like, well, if you're with it, then can you be without it? And so it was more of a, hey, like put the purse down, right? If you have it, you can let it go. Whereas, we're obviously becoming much more educated about the fact that this is not something that disappears or changes as far as the diagnostic criteria, but what it does look at is how can we take this piece that's a part of this person and make it part of the identity first language, such as changing that from I'm a person with autism to I am autistic or I'm an autistic person. So it's now an identity piece. Now, I like the little example here down at the bottom where it talks about if you were to say something in a different identity piece, right? A left-handed person, you would not say I'm a person with left hand or left hand dominance, or I'm a tall person. You would not say I'm a person with tall. So it's that identity characteristic that allows us to change the language from it being viewed as something that you could just drop to the side versus this is a part of the person. And I'm going to go in and say even bigger than that, it's a part of the system. Okay, each person has their own unique relationship with whatever the neurodiversity is. So the systems approach, when we look at this, is that the problem not in the individual, the problem is present in the system, right? That's how we recognize our systemic view. When we change from that first person language into an identity first language, we become much more inclusive and we begin to see that the neurodiversity really applies to all members and their relationship with whatever the neurodiversity is. So families, in essence, are neurodiverse families. And when I work with anyone in this population, that's the way that I try to be able to bring that in and create that term for them. Because a lot of time, I think in the past, there was more emphasis on fixing the person or treating the person that they consider to be neurodivergent instead of it becoming a really more systemic lens of how do we work within a neurodiverse family and really looking at the relationship that each person has with the neurodiversity. And each person does have a unique relationship with it. So those are some ways that we're working on shaping the field and moving into more inclusive language so that we can start beginning to explore neurodiversity from a different lens, from a much more systemic and inclusive lens. Are there questions about anything that I've shared so far? No questions. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop share as that concludes my lovely slideshow. Um, and then I'm going to open it as this is supervision essence of a time to ask if there's any questions or cases, anything in specific that you would like to talk about.
I have a question.
Go
Sorry, I don't
ahead.
know how to do the cool hand raise emoji thing that Zoom can do. So, when you are working with a family who, let's say, has a kiddo that has autism, how does that typically look? Do you include the whole family? Do you include parts of the family?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, and I'm going to take this and make it a much more systemic lens into whether it's autism or anything else that I'm treating. My number one answer is I'm going to get as many people in the room as I can. Okay. So, absolutely, I want to work with the entire family. One of the limitations, obviously, of working with just one individual is that we're very limited to only the view of that individual and we're not getting to see the larger parts of the system. So when we start thinking about some of the current methods for working with autistic individuals, we really see that there's a lot of behavioral modification. And this, in essence, is geared towards managing symptoms. Yes. So, which is great and wonderful. On the one side, it can be very, very helpful for managing symptoms within certain environments because what we would see potentially happen is that, okay, if you've got, you're working with the autistic individual, say in a school setting, and you're doing all this behavioral modification and you're really trying to work with them, then they move from the school environment back to the home environment, and what happens?
Your behavioral modifications may not work.
Yeah, we're kind of back to some ground zero things. Okay. So this is where the system is really, really important, especially in creating congruence between whatever treatment that you're trying to implement. We know that with neurodiverse individuals that consistency can be very important, especially within autism spectrum. That routine can become very, very important, and those sudden changes can create behavioral upset as well as emotional upset. So having the family in the system or in the sessions really is an important piece of making that consistency more congruent throughout, whether it's through the school or whether it's at home. You can utilize the same types of interventions, such as positive reward systems, things like that, that can be congruent within the school system as well as at home. So that can be very helpful in keeping that structure kind of put together. In addition to that, and this is something I often talk about with neurodiverse families, you think about who has the power to change the system. Okay. Oftentimes, if you're left waiting for the neurodiverse individual to take the initiative to change, you're going to be waiting for a hot minute. Okay. So, one of the things that's really important about that and getting the family all included into those sessions is that it's a collective effort from the entire family into the system into where accommodations might need to be made or what can be done to make things flow a little bit easier. So I've had, I'll share case kind of specific. Again, worked residential treatment, and that's where I kind of started. And residential treatment with this population was very much about kind of like instantaneous feedback, right? They're getting feedback in the moment. And it's about behavioral modification. And it was also geared towards trying to find academic success and independent living skills. So it kind of stretched across the spectrum of itself from like a adolescent residential to a young living residential to a more independent living residential. Okay. So no matter where they were along this path, they're learning kind of these individualized skills. And a lot of times then you go, well, how do we get family included in this? Because we battle that same problem if we work in a residential setting and we do all this great work and there's, clients really striving or thriving because of the structure, and then you send them home, right? And there's less structure and there's less instantaneous feedback, right? Then it can kind of, a lot of the work can come a little bit unraveled. And so that's actually what prompted me into family therapy to begin with, was as I seen this happen in residential and in this population, same kind of situation. So I would actually do a lot of the family work to say, let's start working on building these relationships. And we would start doing like the home visits. We would structure to start matching some of what was being structured in the program and then having some of those expectations being structured also within the home on the home visits. And so it was kind of a transition process to where they were starting to rethink kind of how the home environment looked. And so I had families, and especially, once we started working on the relationship side, a lot of families would say to me, like, why haven't we been doing this the whole time? And I'm like, that's a great question, because the system is so important, and the system is one of the main support systems for neurodiverse individuals. So it kind of makes sense to have everybody included that we can. That was a long way around. Do we get to where we needed to be?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Other questions?
Well, to kind of piggyback off of that, how would you go about working with a family that have twins that are both on the spectrum?
Yes, yeah. So first off, one of my favorite sayings in the autism world is if you meet one autistic person, you know one autistic person. Okay. So one of the
Right.
things that I really try to help educate about in this sense is that, even even twins can present very, very different. Okay. I currently do or have had clients that were twins. One identified at a very young age with autism spectrum, one that was not diagnosed until 22 years old.
Oh, wow.
And part of it was is that the one had such severe symptoms that that became the focus. And when there was the comparison, well, this one seems to be okay because they weren't experiencing the same symptoms that the more severe behavioral symptoms that the one was experiencing. And so the other one kind of they kind of normalized that in the sense of like, well, maybe this one doesn't need as much help or doesn't need as much support, or even identified as neurotypical for a very long time until the diagnosis came on later in life. So the first piece is in answering that is to remember that they can each present very differently, and that just because one has certain symptoms and the other one has different symptoms, that doesn't make anyone more or less, right? As far as on the spectrum, they just have a spectrum. And so they have different ways that they're going to experience those symptoms. So that's the first piece. And then as far as having two children on the spectrum, one of my most impactful clients that I saw actually had three children that were all neurodiverse and what we would have called at the time kind of on the severe side of the spectrum, nonverbal, and needed a lot of behavioral modification. And one of the things that I would like to say first and foremost is that yes, the process is absolutely trying to help kind of work the behavioral side with the kiddos. And it's equally important to support the parent or parents, whoever else is in the system, because I mean, they were just taking it, right? Parents were just really, really, really struggling within their relationship, within their parenting styles, what they were going to do. This is a lifelong, right, journey that they're now on. And so a lot of work was done with the actual marital couple to try to reunite that relationship so that they could serve as each other's support system. Um, so that's another piece that I would go into. And then, of course, if working with two kiddos, I think that that's an important piece of understanding is that the treatment approach for each one could be specialized to what it is that they are needing in particular, and knowing that that may not be similar to each other. They can each kind of have their own. But as the family kind of functions as a unit, as you know, the overall system is to really look at how they can function together through the best of their ability. I tend to utilize a solution focus approach. I shouldn't say I tend to, I do. Okay, I'm a solution focused therapist. So a lot of what I do is really looking at ways that they've been able to manage and things that they've done that they have found that has been working for them, and then to be able to say, where else can this be implemented? And sometimes that is very different based upon the family and what works for them.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the marital component because in this case, it definitely um, that relationship is definitely wearing thin because the couple not only have the twins, but they also have an older sibling or older child, and so they is is created a lot of strain within their relationship. And then also too, the oldest child feels like they have to act out in order to get attention. And so the couple is just like constantly putting out fires. They feel like with their kids that their relationship was really suffering and they're just trying to figure out like and so I just want to know what your approach would be with it. Seem like there's so many fires being had. How do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really glad that you brought in, because there is a lot of research that supports, right, the sibling of a neurodiverse individual and how that person um, it's a really rough road, right? Because they're experiencing these behavioral symptoms like everybody else in the family. They have a relationship with those behavioral symptoms that are happening, but they also have their own needs, and they're working on, how do I fit within this system and how do I get my needs met as well? And so that can definitely be a lasting impact. I'll share, I've got another case that I can share. It was three siblings. The middle was a neurodiverse individual. And what ended up happening as far as the way that the sibling order fell was that the oldest sibling seemed to be less impacted at the time, I would say, from the behavioral symptoms. And now it's interesting that the older sibling has probably the better relationship with the middle, right? The middle child that is neurodiverse. Even to the point to where as the parents are now getting older, that they're talking about how the oldest child will be taking on responsibilities for the neurodiverse child after they pass. So that's kind of the relationship that got set up there. On the other side, we had the youngest child who, again, later in life has recognized there's maybe some neurodiverse symptoms that the youngest child was experiencing, not to the severity of what the middle was experiencing. And so the youngest child has a lot of resentment and has a very strained relationship with the neurodiverse child because of feeling like their needs weren't being met, and that all of the time and attention and money went to working for the neurodiverse child. So when you have that in particular, and I would really kind of slow that down, and I'm going to just conceptualize it through my solution focused brain, right? is to look at, what are times that the parents have been able to really kind of provide that love and attention and support with the older sibling, and what does that look like? And understanding that the fires need to be put out, right? Like there's no way that they can just be like, well, we're just not going to do that today. Okay, that they have to deal with that. So then it becomes about, again, how the family works together to create space to attend to the maybe neurotypical child, or the child that the older sibling, it sounds like, in this situation, and to try to really find ways in which they can accommodate as much, right, that child as they're accommodating for the other two children with the diversities. So looking at that from that perspective and seeing which ways, and therapy in itself could even be a platform for that, right? If I were to have the whole family in the session, depending upon ages, interest level, things like that, I might have the individuals that are, say, the twins, kind of engage in session and really see what we could do there within that context. And then also give some accommodation that maybe after 20 minutes, they're like, well, we're done with this. And maybe they stay in the room, maybe do something different on the side, and then maybe work more with the parents and the older sibling to see what work can be done there as well. Again, I want to keep them all in the room and functioning as their system, but also showing how, hey, some of your time can be spent accommodating this child, and some of the time can be spent accommodating the other children. Was that helpful?
No. Yes, it was. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts that come up? Okay. I'm going to share a little bit. I shared a little bit of case conceptualizing with you as far as like my cases that I've had, but I do want to tie a little bit into a few things. Okay. First, to debunk some myths, right? So like myself, when I was starting out as this intern, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this. And so I was very, very nervous, or maybe even questioned my competence to be able to work with this population. Okay. So here's one of the things that I always like to share is that try not to overthink competence, in the sense that, confidence doesn't equal competence. Okay. So a lot of times when people feel incompetent, that can kind of take a toll on their confidence and their abilities. So let me first start by saying, you are the most important part of what you bring to therapy. Okay. Before we get into theory or interventions or any of that other stuff, who you are, your character, your personality, that is the best tool you have in that room. Okay. So first and foremost, anytime I'm working with the neurodiverse families, I want you to understand they're buying into me first and foremost. Who am I as a person? Who am I as a therapist? That's what they're going to see. That's what they're going to get. So I'm just me, and I went into this like one down position. I don't know anything about autism. So go ahead and tell me everything you know, because I didn't know anything. And that authenticity and just bringing myself into the room, that was very helpful. Okay. So let me first let each of you know that based upon personality, right? You've got a lot of people here at Capella supporting you to say, you're competent in you bringing yourself into the room. You have what it takes to be able to walk into a room with a neurodiverse individual or neurodiverse family and to be able to be effective because you're you. Okay. So let's get that out of the way. The second piece is that people are like, well, do I need special training? Do I need special things? This is kind of what I say about every kind of specialty thing out there. If you have an interest and you are like, yeah, this is something I really want to dig into, go dig into it. Do the research, maybe do some additional CE trainings. Okay. AMFT last year had a really great neurodiverse speaker. It was a really cool kind of experience to hear as we listened to what her experience was as coming through the treatment process and now engaging in the treatment process. Okay. So if you have an interest, go ahead, go dig into it. That being said, there isn't anything in particularly like you have to have this training to go and treat this type of clientele. Okay. With neurodiverse individuals, you will be trained on the spot because, like I said earlier, if you know one person, you know one person. And so, even if you go and you learn all about what neurodiversity can look like, when you walk into a room, it's going to be different because they experience it in their own ways. So please keep in mind that as these individuals or families walk into your therapy office, that you're on a learning curve the whole time, right? You're always learning about what their experience is, how their symptoms present, what they present in the family like. That's all going to be new to you anyway. Okay. So no specialty training that you need. And then the other piece that I want to share is that once you get into kind of what theoretical approach you would like to take, I'll share through my solution focus. I'm sure all those are a little familiar with solution focus. One of the interventions that I love the most, okay, is that miracle question. Okay, if we can all go ahead and take a guess on what that miracle includes. Okay. So I ask the miracle question often, and I often get, well, autism wouldn't be here. Okay. Whatever the neurodiversity wouldn't be here. And I wanted to share how I kind of work through that in particular is that keep in mind that even with that miracle question, if the answer is, hey, this neurodiversity won't be here, I try to then dig into that a little bit more into what would that mean if that neurodiversity wasn't there. So if we're talking autism in particular, what would it mean if autism wasn't there? What would it allow you to do if autism wasn't there? And then we can start getting into kind of the deeper parts of that. Well, maybe I'd be able to make friends, or maybe I'd be able to get a significant other. Maybe I'd stop fighting with my parents. Okay. We start to get into the ways that the person is seeing the neurodiversity kind of hindering what they can do or can't do. Okay. So, a way that I tend to then take that bit of information is once I find things like, okay, say maybe it's be able to make more friends. All right, then one step further into what does having friends mean to you? So we can look at, well, there'd be acceptance, and I would feel like people like me, and they might give you a list of these things. Now I've set myself up for some really great exception questions. So if it comes down to, oh, will I be accepted? Maybe that's the piece in particular they come back with. Now I can take that piece and say, well, let's talk about times in which you have felt accepted. And now I've got a really great exception question to kind of follow along. I might even then take that acceptance piece and use it for my scaling. So let's scale acceptance, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1's not accepted a lot. 10 is the most you have ever felt accepted. And let's talk about where you are now. Now, here's another fun adventure that I get with scaling questions. With this population in particular, with my autism individuals, I get very specific numbers. I'm at a 3.749. And I smile. I have to write it down so that I don't forget. And so when I think of my scale, and then I have to kind of move based upon how they conceptualize. So I'm not going to jump right to a 3.8. I'm going to, what would be the next step, right? Maybe it's a 3.97. I can't remember what it was now. Sorry. Maybe it's just up that 0.001, or maybe it's up half a point, or maybe we can go up one. And then I go, okay, so if we were at that, what would be different? And I move along only at the pace that they're seeing it as moving along. Because remember, the number itself is not the goal of scaling, it's the progress and being able to monitor the progress that we're really after there. So even if they're moving up 0.001, we're still moving. Okay, so that's something that's kind of fun that I get out of that. And then lastly, as far as really looking at what I really appreciate about solution focus with this population in particular is understanding that the solutions don't always have to match the problem. Okay, if a person's coming in and they're being treated for autism, okay, and I'm doing that in particular because I do have some thoughts about how I think it's interesting that simply having autism automatically means that you need therapy, as that's the go-to treatment for autism. And I'll just say, from my own experience, just having autism does not mean that you need therapy. That there's individuals, neurodiverse individuals, that are functioning just fine and don't need therapy just because they have a diagnosis. So keep that in mind as well. You can put that wherever you want to store it. That's my view on it. But what I would say is that when I have a person come in and really, the autism's there, and they're maybe not like looking for, hey, like I'm not looking to treat this autism thing as much as because of this autism, I would like to have better relationships. So the nice thing is being able to use solution focus to look at how we can find solutions that may not really have anything to do with the quote unquote autism or diagnosis, and really being able to recognize that whatever solution they come up with is helping them to feel better with who they are and who they are as a family. And so that's a really nice way for me to kind of wrap around that approach and to utilize that in a way that can be effective for these families. Now, this gets us to that debunking of the myth about solution focus, because here's what I've tended to see in this population in particular is that when a neurodiverse family finds a therapist that they like, they don't want to let you go ever. So, that's one of the things that gets talked about. Solution focus is so short, right? It's so brief. In which case I kind of reply, all family therapy is intended to be brief. So it kind of fits in with the rest of it. But what I will say is that imagine the freedom it allows you to look and say, we can treat weekly with what that person comes in to talk about and to treat with weekly, right? Whatever the family's experiencing that week. And being able to have that continue as part of the solutions that are coming up. And to be able to really tailor the approach to what the specific need of the family is, whether it's a given week or several weeks. So that's kind of nice too in looking at that solution focus. While yes, all family therapy is brief, absolutely can be used with this population over a longer term. Yeah, so I think that that kind of covered the theoretical approach side. Is there any questions about use of solution focused or theory in general?
Have you done any other work theory wise other than solution focused with this population?
Yeah, so I do adhere to the idea of um, sticking to a singular theory. And so I would say for myself, I am solution focused. At times, if I am to borrow interventions or concepts, I would say structural is probably my secondary kind of go to for one, because I do believe in hierarchy. Okay. I do recognize that that happens. And I do also believe in power and power dynamics. Um, so in particular, the way that I would look at that through this lens is that sometimes with any type of neurodiversity, accommodations are made to the extent to where it can throw off the hierarchy, right? Either the child is maybe being allowed to do certain things that would bring them into a parental subcategory, or potentially if we have two parents that don't agree on how to parent the neurodiverse child, then one of those parents maybe gets dropped down into the child subcategory. So that I would say is where I kind of go to with that earlier when we talked about really attending to the couple's needs. To try to help them stay strong in that marital subcategory and to do things that are promoting their relationship and working on their relationship to stay strong, because that does ultimately impact the parenting, the structure that then is brought in for the child with the neurodiversity. So structural.
I also tend to stick with solution focused, so I was just curious.
Oh, perfect. Yes. So I want to say, oh man, if I'm stretching here, I'm thinking it was Carl Whitaker that coined kind of that term of like, or the phrase of, you can borrow from other models as long as it's in the lens of your model. So like as a solution focused therapist, if I wanted to do like a genogram because they're super cool and helpful, I would totally do a genogram. I may not track problem cycles because that's not very solution focused. I'm not overly interested in knowing where the problem has passed down from generation to generation, but I might track um, success cycles or how people resilience cycles, right? I might look at how did grandparents deal with controversy in the home, or how did they deal with parenting? Also, it's not uncommon in the neurodiverse population for there to be multiple generations with neurodiversity. So typically, what I've seen is like if I'm especially working with a child that a neurodiverse child, that what I would tend to see is that one of the parents may have similar um, characteristics. Maybe not necessarily diagnosable or to the extent to be diagnosable, but there's certain characteristics that we see maybe each parent. And so, theoretically, if I were to say I'm going to borrow a genogram, I might look at where some of these characteristics maybe have been there for generations and how those characteristics were managed or dealt with, and to look to see what solutions did they find for it. So there's always the ability to take another great idea and to use it within your lens. Any other questions? Go ahead,
So I had a
Rashonda.
question. Yes, I had a question about the broaching the miracle question, right? So with this population, I mean, of course, there's different. I mean, it's a spectrum, right? So I guess how do you broach the miracle question for those who kind of struggle with imagination and deal more with more fact oriented kind of
Beautiful
personality?
question. Yeah, beautiful question. Okay. This is another important part of having some of the family there because sometimes I just depending upon where on the spectrum the person is, I might be working with limited verbal or nonverbal, in which case, asking the miracle question, I'm probably not going to get a whole lot done there. Okay. So that's part of having the family there, is to be able to ask that miracle question. And I absolutely want to attend to each person. So I might ask the miracle question of, say, parents first or sibling, if there's a sibling in there. I might still turn and ask the client kind of the same language, even if they can't verbalize. Maybe they acknowledge, or maybe it's more inclusive that they just get a turn as well, right? So I might do that anyway. But that would kind of allow me to gain perspectives from multiple individuals about what that miracle would look like, so that we can start kind of collaboratively looking at, maybe I look and call the golden thread, right? What is the golden thread that goes along with maybe the multiple answers, multiple perspectives? And so I look for kind of those things, and I'll take notes along the way, and then I'm able to take those solutions that they're talking about within this miracle question. And then ultimately at the end of the session, I take all of those, I pretty much hand them back and say, here's all the great solutions you came up with today. And I'm going to give you a few minutes, and you as a family decide which one of these you'd like to do. And then they get to look at that and say, oh, well, maybe this week we're going to take a family walk because, our older, say in your particular case, the older child may really like walking to the park and going and playing basketball. And the neurodiverse twins might also like a walk and getting to run around and do stuff like that. So maybe that's what they decide as beneficial for the whole family to be able to do as a solution together.
Oh, that's good. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that's kind of what I had.
Okay.
So I don't know. Any questions for me in general, I guess. I mean, it doesn't have, this topic is fine, or other topics, other supervision topics. We have a few minutes left. Is there anything else that anybody would find helpful to bring in today?
Sorry, this is unrelated to this topic, but it has to do with therapy. You mentioned you take notes during the session. Are you like a paper and pencil gal? I'm just trying to figure out the way that is going to be most. Oh, sticky notes.
That's it. My life is sticky notes. If you could just see my desk around me right now. And it also lends to be very beneficial. Now, let me tell you, I'll tell you really, it's very brief note taking, just things to prompt me to kind of remember. I'm not a person that takes full iteration of everything that was said, but I kind of put them together on a sticky note. And then, as I said, in a live session, I would be able to hand like a paper or whatever back to the clients and have them pick. But a sticky note works really well, because in teletherapy, this is what I can actually do. I just hold this up and it's got all of their solutions on it, and it kind of blocks me from view. And then when they've decided, then I come back into the room. And that way, that's kind of about them and their space to decide. And they're all squinting at the screen and looking at my chicken scratches and trying to decipher what that says. And then they kind of talk about it. And it's really traditional solution focus. You would potentially even leave the room, right, to give them that autonomy to decide what goal they wanted to work on and then maybe come back. That's my way, especially in telehealth, to be able to create some of that separation and to be able to give them the space to look at those solutions and then to kind of bring myself back in. So the sticky notes work double fold for me. Like, they're quick and easy. And then at the end, right, I easily can shred them because they're just my, mental notes here. And then they're done. And so that kind of creates a nice, easy way for me to be able to do that.
Awesome. I really like the idea of writing down the solutions or potential solutions and then having the client.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's had the fortune of having Dr. Lee Schiltz as an instructor. Um, true solution focus, right? He actually did his training with DeShazer and Insu Kimberg, right? As they were kind of crafting this, he was telling me one time, that when they first started the Solution Focus like association. It was in Steve DeShazer's living room, and they're having dinner and talking Solution Focus, and it blows my mind to think of something like that. But I watched him do this, and this is kind of where I borrowed his idea, because first I'll say he's a tree killer, but with good intention. But he would write the solution on a paper, and he'd kind of rip it off and lay it down on the ground, and it kind of looked disorganized at first. And I said, "What are you doing, Lee?" Like, and another paper and another paper. But the resounding effect that it had at the end, as he brings this beautiful archway of papers of all of these solutions that the clients had come up with, and then he scooped them all up together, and he said, "Look at all of these solutions you came up with today." And it was such a beautiful moment. I was like, "Oh, that's how that happens, huh?" I'm like, "Okay." And then he handed it back to the clients and said, "You work together and decide which one you want to work on this week." And they worked together. And I think it was some kind of ludicrous thing about, we're going to go bird watching or something that you would never have thought was going to be the solution for the problem that they came in with. But that's what they chose, and that's what they did. And it was great. It was beautiful. So, yeah, take it, use it. If it works for you, go work it. Use the note taking.
Definitely going to try that next week.
Yes, well, I'm sure my email's like everybody else's here, cindy.mcintyre@capella.edu, right? So you let me know how it goes. You can email me and let me know what happened. I'd love to hear.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before we close out for today? Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody letting me talk for all this time. For those, like I said, that are in internship that would like to claim the hour for today, go ahead. Lose Mary, sorry that you're not there quite yet, but hopefully another one down the road, right?
Next time, definitely.
Next time, perfect.
Yeah, next
Okay.
time for me too.
And next time for you too, Rashonda?
Yes.
Oh, fun. Okay. Wow. Not this time around, but next time for sure. So I'm gonna, I guess, hand it back to you. I don't know how we make this work, but do we
Sure.
just close it?
Yeah, so I put in the chat a survey. So if Jackie and Luzmere, if y'all can take it, that'll be great. But other than that, yes, we want to thank Dr. McIntire for your time. It was very beneficial. And yeah, and
Okay.
if there's nothing else, yes, I'll go ahead and end the meeting.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and I'm sure I'll see you down the road. Have a good one.
Yes. All right, you too.